Hi, my name's Marie Stinner, and I'm an alcoholic. And, well, this is cute. Anybody got an idea how long I'm supposed to talk? Oh, you better not tell the entertainment that. Well, here we are in Minneapolis, and I didn't drink all day, and I'm real impressed with that. If I ever needed a drink, it's been here, and but thank you, God, Alcoholics Anonymous works everywhere, and I've been asked to tell you a little bit of what I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm trying to be like today. And one of the things that I learned early on in Alcoholics Anonymous is that I could probably talk, you know how they say, walk like you talk? Well, I could always talk better than I ever walked. So I try to make it my business to talk like I walk, which is much better for me. Just to come and tell you guys how I live, and in hopes that maybe someone somewhere might benefit from it. I was, by the way, some people think I'm offensive, and I really don't mean to be, but there are so many thank yous to be said at these deals that if you spent all your time saying thank you, you wouldn't have any time to talk. And I was taught when I was new in Alcoholics Anonymous that the reward for service was service, and my great blessing and my great hope for all of you who were in service at this conference is that you got your reward for being a servant. You know, it's very difficult. I get up in the morning, I tell God that I want to be a servant. It hurts like hell when people treat you like one, though. And so, anyway, I used to drink and I don't anymore, and that's the most important thing I have to say to you. If you're new in Alcoholics Anonymous, I'd like to welcome you. I personally would like to welcome you, and to tell you that I hope with everything in me that it will be as good to you as it's been to me. To tell you also, those of you who are way back at the back of the room, I am the least likely person, or one of the most least likely people in Alcoholics Anonymous to be a speaker. I didn't hang out with speakers. I was real impressed about that deal you have called special situations, because I would have never had money to come to a conference. I really didn't even know they existed. I could tell you about Tehachapi State Penitentiary. I can tell you about the Women's County Jail in Los Angeles. I can tell you about a lot of great meetings, but I couldn't tell you anything about conferences, you know. And I am not, I can talk all night long about Alcoholics Anonymous and what it's done in my life, but personally I'm a relatively shy person. And I never was a person that, you know, I wasn't a party drinker. I wasn't I just didn't do that deal. And so I want to tell you that my first conference, in my first year of sobriety, some people in my home group got this crazy idea that I should go to this conference, and they just kind of stuck me in the car, and I didn't have any money or anything, and this girl loaned me a dress, and it was one of those things, it was in Palm Springs, and somebody loaned me a dress, and they had this motel, because, you know, people I knew didn't have a lot of money. My best friend, Tammy, was on aid to the totally disabled. That was $236 a month, and I thought she was rich. And but we stayed in this hotel about 5 miles from where the conference was, one of those little Motel 6 things, and my place was on the floor. And I got to sleep on the floor. The AAs took care of me. And it was at that conference that I sat way, way, way back in the room, only there were 3,000 people there. And a man stood up at a podium and he had white hair. And I swear to you, it was almost like this man glowed around him. And he made a statement, and I could see it all the way in the back. He said that if the first two words of the Our Father are true, that means we're all God's kids. And I sat there in the back of the room, and he caught me with the second sentence. And he said, and God has no stepchildren. And I remember sitting all the way in the back, and it was like they knew that I was the stepchild, you know. And I remember my eyes watered up. And you know how when you get water in your eyes like you're going to cry, but you can't cry in front of people, so you force it back real hard, and you end up with a headache. That's what I did. That's what I did. And everybody else in the room was crying, but I just couldn't let those people see me cry. I just couldn't, because you know what? They might have known how bad I wanted to be sober. And what if I told them how bad I wanted to be sober, and then I didn't get it? You see, I had broken my own heart so many times that by the time I was finally rendered sober, you know, it was like if I died alone again, that was okay, because I was used to that. But I didn't want to go with you guys knowing how bad I wanted it, so I just wouldn't tell. And I couldn't believe it, but it was a mere 4 years later in Alcoholics Anonymous that I was standing in a kitchen, and I got a call one day from a lady named Elsie Faye Maroney. And I had never, ever been back to Palm Springs or any other convention. I had never talked in front of a large meeting. I had been a substitute speaker for a guy that got cancer once, half girl. And I was standing in my kitchen that day, and I got a phone call that said, my name is Elsie Faye Maroney, and we would like for you to be a speaker at the Palm Springs Roundup. And I hung up that phone, and my husband looked at me and he said, you know, honey, that's a long ways from that little girl that used to walk the streets. So you see, miracles happen in Alcoholics Anonymous. When I was newly sober, I never dreamed, you know, that anything like this would happen. I'm sure nobody did, but I was born in the South. I was born in Georgia and raised in Oklahoma. Now, well, don't be too proud. I'm getting ready to say some things. I'm the speaker, and they want me to share my experience, and that's what it's going to be. But I'm going to tell you just a little bit, just a tiny little bit about what I was like prior to my first drink, because it's real important. Because, you know, our 12 by 12 talks about those events in our lives that went on later on to color the whole fabric of our existence, you know. And thank you, God, that Alcoholics Anonymous is a program where we can get that stuff up and out and don't live in that anymore. But I want to tell you a little bit about what she was like. I was born in the South. Since the day I was born, or as far back as I can remember, I've needed an answer. For some people, alcoholism is a step down. In my case, it was a step up. For a lot of people, Alcoholics Anonymous is a step down. In my case, it was a step up. I had needed an answer since the day I was born. As far back as I could remember, I was absolutely strangled by the manifestations of self. Fear, resentment, remorse, self-loathing. I had attitudes and ideas. I believed I was ugly. You know, if you're from the South now, you may not want to admit it, but you know that women are for breeding. And that just was a fact. And I was taught, now I'm sure none of you ladies here have ever had sex, but I always talk about it. No, I always talk about it, and I'll tell you why. Because our co-founders thought sex was important enough that they dedicated a whole quarter to the inventory proceedings. So I always talk about it, and when I say to you that women were for breeding, in my family I have 3 brothers, okay? And the whole purpose in life, if I ever went to college, which certainly nobody ever mentioned to me or anything, just my brothers, but The whole purpose, anything I ever did in life was so that I could grow up and get a man so I could be somebody, you know. And I was taught things about sex, like, and these are interesting things. I don't know if you do this in Minneapolis, but I was taught things about sex, like if a man could go to a library and check out a library book, he'd have no reason to buy it, you know. Well, which proved not to be true later on. I made a lot of money on the streets of Los Angeles, but you know, at that time, having been checked out at a very young age, I thought my life was over. I made decisions based on self, the woman you see standing up here today, that I was not good enough. I threw Marie Stenner away a long, long time ago. You know, I thought you were supposed to be a lady, and ladies had blonde hair and pink lipstick. Now, don't ask me why I believed that. That was just a childish notion. And they were supposed to get a husband, and you're supposed to sit there and be demure. I went to cotillion. I knew. And you're supposed to get a man and sit there and sit next to him and go, and I've never been demure. It just never worked. I hated things about myself, like I always cried when I wasn't supposed to cry, and I laughed. You know, the very things that I hated about me are the very things that the people of Alcoholics Anonymous and God have loved me most for. I'm so grateful to be alcoholic. Anyway, I thought I was ugly, and if I ever did get a chance at a man, I'd have to hang on real tight because I'd never get a chance at another one. And Elvis Presley came out with a very sad maudlin love song when I was 13 years old called I Can't Help Falling in Love with You. And, you know, I'm glad some of you know about it. It's a wonderful song. But I used to lay up in the bed, and I would listen to that song and just lay up in the bed and sob. And, you know, I've never had a drink or a boyfriend yet. I mean, I was just like that. I have been strangled by the manifestation. I mean, my fears, it was all right up here. I couldn't breathe. I could not breathe. The first answer I found was lying. I used to lie about everything. I told you I made a decision based on her. She wasn't good enough. I got some freedom from her. I lied. I lied about everything. I lied about my name. I lied about everything. I just lied, you know. When I was 13, I believe the first miracle happened in our life. And after our house burned down, we got the hell out of Oklahoma. I want to tell you right now that some of the most wonderful times I have had in Alcoholics Anonymous have been in Oklahoma City, Texas, Georgia. I go to Texas to speak 4 or 5 times a year. I'm going to Georgia twice this year. You know, God doesn't want us to have any holes in our soul. And I've been able to heal in so many areas. Anyway, we got the hell out of Oklahoma back then, you know, and that was good. I believe only my God and I knew. I couldn't have survived. And my family moved to Los Angeles. A dumb little girl from Oklahoma. I'm telling you, we hit Los Angeles, and they had whole cities of stuff out there that we didn't even talk about back home. Not only did they have people that had been checked out and weren't ashamed, but they were talking about it out loud, looking to do it again. I had never seen anything like it. I mean, there were all different sexual preferences, all different colors of hair, it was like my mind exploded, because I had always felt like I was breathing somebody else's air and they were going to find out any minute and snatch it from me. And I hit Los Angeles and my mind exploded. It was shortly after I was in Los Angeles that I took my medicine for the first time. And for those of you who don't know me, I've never had a social drink. I've never had one, you know. I'm kind of disappointed. I didn't get to try strawberry daiquiris. You know, I see them every... Well, but I mean, you know, I'm sure that was very lovely, but I missed it. I just missed the whole thing. You know, Now I'm, sober. I'm reduced to Baskin and Robbins sugar-free ice cream. I mean, But anyway, I was out there. We arrived in Los Angeles. First time I ever took my medicine. I was with a bunch of kids at a place called Style Park. It's up above Burbank, and it's kind of a lover's lane type deal. And these kids were, passing their bottles around and kissing and hugging, and I didn't even try for that stuff because I knew I was no good. So, but what had happened to me was I had gotten a hold of a bottle of sloe gin and a warm quart of Coors. And I went over to the edge of that cliff, and I told those kids I was going to go look at the lights. And I drank that bottle of sloe gin, and I chased it with that warm quart of Coors. And that's the way I drank for the next 9 years. It was shortly thereafter that I was introduced to the wonderful world of drugs other than alcohol, and before your mind slams shut, let me tell you something. The textbook Alcoholics Anonymous states that the obsession of the alcoholic is somehow, some way, he's going to beat this game. I was from a family of alcoholics, and the one thing in the world I did not want to be was alcoholic. And when I was introduced to the wonderful world of drugs other than alcohol, I'm going to tell you something. I really thought I had beat the game. I could kill the way I felt inside, but I wasn't going to end up like them, the alcoholics. Now, if you study our text, you will find, when I was new, back then AA wasn't multiple choice. It was just, it was A and A. That's all it was, And we were all kind of in it together. And when I was finally rendered sober, they put a textbook in my hands called Title Alcoholics Anonymous. And they told me that if I could find myself within the confines of that book, that I too could recover. And what happened to me was I don't identify as an alcoholic and an addict simply because I believe it's redundant. It's like saying I'm an alcoholic. People don't say I'm a champagne addict, I'm a Jim Beam. I have the disease of alcoholism, and I love bourbon whiskey. Now, I know there are people in this room that love bourbon whiskey as much as I do, but I will tell you there is nobody that loved it anymore. Nobody. Anyway, I made two brilliant decisions based on self long about that time. I've been making decisions based on self for a long time, and I made two brilliant decisions based on self, that if I could just stay loaded till I died and never love anybody, everything would be all right. Because loving hurts too bad. Loving hurts too bad. It took a long time for the disease of alcoholism to progress in my life to the point that it got as bad as it was prior to my first drink. Long time. Anyway, my drinking career is very simple. I was on the streets 6 months, locked up 6 months, on the streets 3 months, locked up 18 months, in and out of institutions. And I never want to forget that the first time I went to juvenile hall, our text in the doctor's opinion states that the alcoholic will reach a point where he cannot differentiate the true from the false, and his alcoholic life becomes the only normal one. And I don't know what your alcoholism was like, but I'm going to tell you about mine. The first time I ever went to juvenile hall, I was absolutely terrified. I had never even known anyone. I was the only kid in juvenile hall that said yes, ma'am, to the counselors. Right? And I learned quick, fast, and in a hurry that's not the way to be. Now, that's the way I was in the beginning, and I never want to forget that in the end of my drinking, I always kept a few miscellaneous warrants out so that I could go home when I got tired. It had become normal for me to go to institutions. It had become normal for me to see every living human being as the enemy to the point that I no longer experienced it. It became normal for me to compromise myself to a point that I no longer experienced the compromise. It had become normal for me to carry guns. It had become normal for me to live the way I was living, to the point that by the time I was rendered sober, I couldn't remember when I had lived any other way. I did what I had to do in order to get where I was going to go, period. Period. I want to tell you a little bit about what I hope was my last drunk. And I always share it no matter where I go, and it's a reason. There's a reason for it. You see, by the time I started seeking help shortly before my 18th birthday, and I wasn't able to stay sober. I went to my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting shortly before my 18th birthday, and I wasn't able to stay sober. And it began a journey for me that lasted in and out for 5 years of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it seemed like everybody in AA knew why I couldn't stay sober but me. And you know those people that get up and walk clear across the room just to tell you what a loser you are? And then they even quit doing that. I was absolutely baffled as to why I couldn't stay sober. I'd empty the cups. I always went to meetings. I emptied the ashtrays. And each time I'd go out, I'd have a little bit more demoralization, a little bit more despair, and a little bit less hope. And each time I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous, because this is just where you end up if you're like I was. You don't make a decision to get sober. You just end up back here. And each time I came back, I had a little bit less hope and all of that stuff. And my last drunk, or what I pray God was my last drunk, was I had been sober for a period of time in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was not getting better. It was getting worse. And that thing that I had with me that was like a blowtorch going around and around and around in my guts, that got bigger and bigger and bigger, continued to get bigger until I absolutely felt I could not breathe. And people would walk up to me and say, "Isn't it wonderful to be sober?" The ones with the white teeth. And I would think, "No, can't you see?" I would get sober and I would go insane. And I remember that last time I hung on as long as I could, and I took 3 days to make a decision. I took what I knew of being drunk on this hand and what I knew of being sober on this hand, and what I knew of being sober was the friends, the ones with the white teeth, and they told me if I stayed sober I could get responsible, and you know what, ever since I was about 15 years old, people have been telling me, you gotta get responsible. And I don't know if you've ever noticed the people that talk about getting responsible a lot always look real miserable. And I didn't know what getting responsible meant. I thought it had something to do with being a waitress. I really didn't know and I remember them telling me that if I stayed sober I could get a boyfriend. Now, 23 years ago, I looked around Alcoholics Anonymous, and I thought, you're kidding. I took what I knew, the outside job of sobriety, the outside things, and I took what I knew of being loaded, including the jails and the degradation and and they told me if I got loaded that I would go places I hadn't been before, and I couldn't imagine where I was going to go. I had a worse story at 20 than most of these people had at 60. And I just figured it'd be more of the same. You know what I mean? And getting drunk came up the winter, and I never want to forget why. And it's because I had to have some relief. I could not stand the way I felt. I knew for me to drink was to die. I knew I couldn't drink successfully. I knew all of that. But I had to have some relief, maybe a blackout, maybe something. And I would get sober later. Now, I picked up that drink, and it lasted for almost a period of a year. And I made 2 more brilliant decisions based on self. And that was, number 1, that I would stay loaded till I died, or that something happened to me to make the program of Alcoholics Anonymous work for me the way it did for you guys. Because I knew it worked, I could see it. And I also knew there was something wrong with me. I remember this guy, Joe, walking up to me at 26 years sobriety. I was 22 years old, and he walked up and he said, "You know, little lady, you're your problem." And I thought, no shit. I mean, it was like, what? I was 10 years sober before I got well enough to blame you guys. You know what I mean? I knew I was the problem. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I thought maybe it was a deep psychological or a mental. My mother took me to my first psychiatrist when I was 7. I thought maybe it was a deep psychologicals or something. But anyway, I made those 2 brilliant decisions based on self, and I want to tell you where I ended up. Because you see, by the time I was rendered sober, my worst fear is that I had gone too far. That no matter what I ever did, no matter how many showers I ever took, no matter how many chairs I set up, no matter how many prayers I said, no matter how I looked, no matter how much I tried to act like you guys, I had just gone too far. I would never get that inside filth off of me, that I was just too dirty. I had gone too far. And you know, when I was newly sober, it seemed like I'd listen to women talk. And the women, oh well, it's my story. It seemed like the ladies had cleaned up their talks so much that I thought I was the only one. You know, even today, sometimes I listen to women speakers, and after they're finished, I think, but did they drink? I know that our book says tell in a general way. If I get any more general, it won't be my story. You know, men talk about peeing in linen closets and doing it, and everybody just laughs. You know, and I sat there and I thought, if I am ever able to stay sober, I will stand up someplace, someday, and tell with the dignity that I believe only a spiritual experience can give. You know, because if God could be for me, who could be against me? That I would stand up someday and tell where I came from, in the hopes that maybe if there was just one gal out there or one guy that was sitting in that room that night, dressed up or not dressed up, trying to pull it off and act like one of the good alcoholics, that just maybe I would tell where I came from and they would know. Where I ended up, quite simply, was I ended up a very cheap $10 whore, walking the streets of Hollywood in an absolute state of shock that I ended up like that. Because other women are supposed to end up like that. Women that are less bright, less pretty. I mean, by now I was getting paid for it. I knew I wasn't that ugly. You know what I mean? But women less bright. And besides, I was going to stop. I had been to AA. I was going to stop. People like me don't end up like that. And the tragic part was I wasn't doing that because I wanted to. I was doing that because I genuinely believed I couldn't have this. I genuinely believed that. What happened to me is I started trying to kill myself. The textbook Alcoholics Anonymous states that a man will reach a point where he cannot envision life with or without alcohol. I didn't believe I could be sober. And I could not drink any more. And it says he'll wish for the end. It's the jumping off place. And that's what happened to me, and I started trying to kill myself, and I kept waking up. And I wasn't happy about it. And I tried so many times, and I woke up so many times. I've been dead on arrival 3 times. And what happened to me was I had been around AA long enough to hear about this thing called the higher power, God. And I got this childlike notion that nobody got to die without God's permission. And I will tell you this, I believe that more today than I ever have. Because either God hears all the cries of alcoholics, or he hears none. And I believe the woman that I loved most in the world, that I would have given anything to give this program to, was my Aunt Jo. When I was in Oklahoma, Aunt Jo moved to California, and she married a Navy captain, and she used to wear high heel shoes and short shorts and drove a Cadillac convertible with long dangly earrings, and used to come see me, and I just thought she was so wonderful. And if I could have given this program to anybody, it would have been her. And when I was 2 years sober, she died. And I knew then that even though I believed there was a recovery for my Aunt Jo, evidently there wasn't. Regardless of what I think. Anyway, I got to believing that nobody died without God's permission, and I got down on my knees, and I said what I believe for me was the first or second naked prayer I'd ever said in my life. I've been sober longer. I now remember another. And by naked, I mean that my outsides matched my insides. There was nothing between me and me anymore. I had burnt out of self. There was none of that resentment. There was none of that. There was just nothing left. The war was over, and I lost. There was nothing in between me and me anymore. And I went to a God that I didn't understand except my granny had told me that God could see and hear everything you were thinking. So you didn't play games with God. Okay? And I went to this God, and I got down on my knees, and I said, God, I don't know what's wrong with me. I've done everything I know to do. I've been in private therapy. I've been in group therapy. I've been to alcohol. I've been in Synanon. I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous. They sent me to Narcotics Anonymous. The people at Narcotics Anonymous told me to go back to Alcoholics Anonymous. I had done everything I knew to do, and I had had the help of the greatest people, and I could not make it. And would you let me go soon? Now, I had dying in mind, and it's not open for discussion because I lived it. It is my opinion that a part of Marie Stinner died that night because it was through a very strange series of events that I ended up back in another Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Not one I called to go to, not one that an AA member unsolicited by any human, may have been a whisper, came to my grandmother's house. And I was too tired to say no. So I ended up at another Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. You think I'd be thrilled? I wasn't. It didn't work for me. And I knew it. And I was taken to what I believe is one of the greatest places on the face of the earth, and that's called the Owl Nest in the San Fernando Valley, and they call it the sickest of the sick. And I will be forever grateful. Those people were just as sick as they were, because they were just sick enough to believe that the power laid out in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous could take that pathetic little 23-year-old girl and create a miracle in her life. You see, if they had been a little bit weller, they might have said, you were a what? Oh, excuse me, dear, you don't belong here. Your language, sweethearts. They might, if they'd been a little bit weller, but they were just sick enough to believe that the power laid out in the textbook Alcoholics Anonymous could take that little girl. And the way you got me at the age of 23 was I had amassed 17 felonies in the courts, and I had jumped bail on them, not because I was a big-time criminal. I just made a nuisance of myself. Drunks don't make good criminals. You know. And I wasn't stupid. I got scared. I jumped bail on them. And I no longer owned a pair of shoes because my friends had ripped me off when I was in the hospital. This side of my face was black from a beating, another beating I don't remember. You see, by the end of my drinking, success was when I woke up after a beating by myself so that nobody was there to see me and I could just die alone. You know, this side of my face was black from a beating. I didn't know if I was straight or gay. I had been making my living by prostitution for years. I had been a slipper in Alcoholics Anonymous for 5 years. I had a heroin habit in addition to my alcoholism. Now, any one of those things would have been enough to make the people in AA nervous, but to have all that, I mean, and thank you, God, I drank long enough and hard enough that I drank me up, and one of the wonderful wonderful things is that when I was finally rendered sober, I was not an addition to anybody's party. And I drank long enough and hard enough to keep the social members of Alcoholics Anonymous away from me. And what was left were a very few dedicated people that studied the text Alcoholics Anonymous, and to this day I don't know if it was out of virtue or just they wanted to get me away from them, that they gave me that book and told me if I could find myself within the confines of that I could recover. Back then AA wasn't multiple choice. This was the only ball game in town. And a gal named Jerry E., and she's still sober, walked up to me one day and looked at me and said, "You know, Murray," because back then my name was Murray, not because I was butch, just because I ran the streets and stuff like that, but she walked up to me and she looked at me and she said, "You know, Murray, you can't stay sober." I was so relieved somebody knew. Because ever since I'd been coming to AA, they told me I could stay sober, and I couldn't. She said, "You're going to have to find a God of your very own that will keep you sober no matter what." And you know what she did? She walked away. She didn't wait for an answer. She labored under the illusion that I wanted what she had. She did not want what I had. I was given a grace. I was given a grace. If you're new in Alcoholics Anonymous, the word grace means an unwarranted, unearned, unmerited gift. Because right there, something happened. And you know, after studying the textbook Alcoholics Anonymous, I understand today that that is the basis of our whole program. It tells us over and over and over, self-knowledge avails us nothing. 100% hopeless apart from divine help. You know, that doesn't leave a lot of room for the imagination. You know, talking about, once again, we wish to reemphasize that the alcoholic at certain points have no effective mental defense against the first drink. And that defense, you know what that means to me? That means that no matter how many meetings I ever go to, no matter what I ever learn about Alcoholics Anonymous up here, no matter what I learn in college about alcoholism, no matter what I ever do, someday, somewhere, sometime, it's going to be the bottle and me, and the bottle's going to win. No effective mental defense. Jerry told me that I was to go home and get down on my knees and ask God to keep me sober in the morning and thank Him at night. She didn't wait for an answer, and like I say, it wasn't multiple choice back then. You know, it wasn't like, "Oh, you don't pray, well, why don't you go on over here to this and such." You don't. Back then, we weren't all split off. You know, the gays over here and the straights over here and the motorcycles over here and the low bottoms here, and it was just all there. You know, we were just all hanging out together. We were people that would not normally mix. That was a fact. And what happened is I was given a grace, and I went home and I got down on my knees. How do you pray when you're a broken down old whore? I mean, seriously. And I know some of you newcomers are going to have this problem. You know, you get down on your knees. You know, I didn't have a place to live. The AAs passed me around, a lot like Sharon. You know, I have to tell you, Sharon, I never was a hip. I'm a child of the 60s, too. But do you know that I got sober and I didn't even know there was a Vietnamese war? That is drunk. And I missed the whole damn thing. And I never was a hippie because they believed in free love and I charged. I really wanted to believe in that stuff, but I just, you know, I couldn't. But anyway, there I was, and I got down on my knees, and I remember being in somebody's house in a room, and it's like, how do you pray when you're like that? When you're new in AA and you're not real well acquainted with God. And I would go, I'd get on my knees and I'd go, God. 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 And then I'd try and do it inside, you know. And it just felt so dumb. My skin was all there. And the room seemed so big, like I'd go, God, and it just echo. I mean, it was this huge empty room, and I just felt so dumb. But God gave me a grace, and I kept doing it. And you know something? I don't know when it happened. I don't know if it was 6 months, 8 months. I don't know when it was. But at some point, I was getting on my knees, and the room wasn't empty anymore. And it wasn't big. It was warm, and there was something needing my words. I'll tell you something. Whenever I find something that works, I use it. And there is no magic like that in Alcoholics Anonymous. Those of you who are new, we have a lot of visitors in AA, and we want you to visit. You know, you come in here when you're new and you use what we tell you about. These different ladies that share with you their big book and their lives, and you're supposed to borrow ours. And you visit your guest. You use what we have. We want you to. But I will tell you, the day that you become a member is somewhere, sometime, when you're standing in a phone booth, somewhere, and that madness is on you, and you cannot help yourself, and nothing. You can't remember any of it. And something will come through that you heard at a meeting, and you stand there, use one of the tools, and literally experience a change. And it's awesome. You then will get as hooked as I am on Alcoholics Anonymous. I found something that worked here. That old man with the white hair was to become a teacher of mine. And I remember, I told you I was afraid I was too dirty for Alcoholics Anonymous, and that man stood up at the podium one night, and he talked about how the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous were an inside shower. You see, I had always taken the outside. I never knew about the insides. The way I got my original sponsor, which is not Alabama, who is my loving, dear example in Alcoholics Anonymous today. My original sponsor walked up to me one time in a meeting. She looked at me. She said, "You know, Marie, you're a pretty girl, and that's a shame." She said, "Pretty girls don't have to develop character, not even in Alcoholics Anonymous. You get doors opened for you. Things happen." She said, "However, sobriety is a character-building proposition, and you're the one that's going to die." And she walked off, and I went after her. She was a tremendous woman. I slept on people's floors. I became a student of the text Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't understand the words. I would go like to 6-step meetings, and they'd be. I remember being new and being in those meetings that, I didn't know what a character was or a defect. Not only did I not understand what they were talking about, not only could I not participate, I couldn't even follow. And I would sit in those meetings and they would talk about honesty, and they would say one cash register honesty, but I couldn't understand what kind of honesty they were talking about. And I was so afraid my dishonesty was going to get me drunk before I was able to get honest. I was really a mess. The obsession with self. The obsession with self. Totally isolated. And I continued to pray. I slept on people's floors, and I want to tell you a little bit about my first birthday in Alcoholics Anonymous. At last the day had arrived. I don't know if I got sober in January, February, or March. If I had known I was going to stay sober, I would have paid attention, but I never did before. So, but we know I was at Jerry's third birthday party. So, and my friends assigned me the sobriety date of March 1st because it didn't interfere with anybody else's. That's the one they picked for me. And so March 1st this year I'll be celebrating 18 years of sobriety. And I would say it's 17, because there's no such thing as almost. If you're going to be sober 18 years and 2 days, you're 17. You know what I mean? So, but I think I can probably safely say that I've been sober 18 years. And anyway, at last the day had arrived, and they picked this March 1st date. And, these people had fed me and clothed me and done all this stuff for me, and I just prayed and read that book and was kind of a little member of AA, And I didn't work with newcomers because I was too afraid if I worked with them I would hurt them. And so I just prayed for them a lot. And I was, at last the day had arrived. I told everybody my date was that day, and I was afraid that nobody in my home group was going to care, which is so crazy. It's so alcoholic. And I went to a group in Central Hollywood called Gramercy Street. And at that meeting they have, you walk downstairs and there's big round wooden tables. And I went down those stairs and I walked in that meeting, and one of those big round wooden tables was all covered with gifts and cards and flowers and a music box that played Love Story. And they were all for me. You see, there were always two kinds of people in the world, and I didn't know why. The good people and me. I was never the kind of person people gave flowers to. I didn't know why that was. You know who the good people are. The wind's just at their back. Everything they're touched, even if they're rotten, good stuff happens to it. You know what I mean? And I didn't know why I was like I was. And there in that night, there was that table. And I sat down in that meeting. And the time went by, and all of a sudden it occurred to me, that, oh my God, it's my birthday. That means I'm going to have to say something. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to say? I'm still so sick. I don't have a job or a boyfriend or any of those things you're like supposed to have if you're, good AA. And I thought, what am I going to say? And it was as if my Heavenly Father spoke to me, and I believe He did. It was thoughts not my own. And it occurred to me that no matter how sick I knew I was, that I had been gifted with 365 days back-to-back freedom from the bottle. And that no matter how sick I knew I was, there were women back there in those rooms just sitting on the edge of their chair that were new, just waiting for me to say something, because no matter how sick I knew I was, to them I was well, and they would give their right arm to have what I had. And I began to sob. It was the first time in my life I had ever been an example of anything good. Anything. And it's the reason I'm here. You guys are pretty fancy here. I have to tell you that. I pulled Gail aside. I said, Gail, what the hell did you ask me here for? This is a real fancy do. I'm a bit out of my league. And that's the reason I'm here. Because there's some gal here that's trying to pull it off. And I know it. What I want to tell you about the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous in that inside shower is that I'm cleaner on the inside tonight than I am on the outside. I just became a student of that book. And I began my most fervent prayer was that someday I would get to give back to Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to tell you very quickly a few high points in my sobriety because they've been very important. I told you that lady asked me to talk when I was 5 years sober, and by now I was married to a scientist. You better laugh. I just crack up to this day. My granny told me I better get more education because my husband would get bored with me. I told him, Granny, he didn't marry me for my education. You know what I mean? By now I was married to a scientist, and I had given birth to a little blonde-eyed, blue-eyed, blonde-eyed, but you know how it is. The eyes were blue, the hair was blonde. And I had this little... Children were always in a class with dogs and cats with me. I never understood why people had them. I was just like kind of passing through, and I always knew it. And I had this little creature at home, and I was asked to speak at this roundup. Now I got to tell you, I stood up there that day, and I had watched the ladies in Alcoholics Anonymous that dressed with their pumps and wore their, and I practiced. Hi, my name is Marie. What's your name? You know, and because I wanted to carry the message in Alcoholics Anonymous. I really did. I bought, and I remember I didn't even know how to dress when I went to that conference, and I watched the ladies, and I got a little white pair of pumps, and I had these little white pearls, and I had a little blue dress, and I stood up there, and I told my story, that little girl gone astray, ended up on a street corner, God came so long and saved her. It was my day to say thank you to Alcoholics Anonymous, to tell them, look what you made of me. Now, I got to tell you, I got midway through that talk, and I burst into tears. I had never told my story in front of dressed-up drunks. And I got to the part about being a street whore, and I started crying. I lost it. I mean, I just sobbed. I completely lost control. And I will never forget what happened. I have no idea how long it was. But when I finally was able to open my eyes, I looked out on that audience, and there were over 1,000 people giving me a standing ovation with tears streaming down their face. That was every prom I had never had. That was every white wedding dress I had never worn. That was everything to me in Alcoholics Anonymous. I thought it was a one-shot deal. I didn't know, I thought it was just I didn't know they had these all over the country. And within 6 months, I was asked to 6 major conventions in and out of the country, and I started traveling in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it began a journey for me that I want to talk about. I got introduced to an Alcoholics Anonymous I never knew existed. I really believed if you were 15 years sober, you didn't gossip. I really believed that everything you said you did. And you can laugh, but I'm going to tell you something. I believe, people say to me, how could you be that stupid? But I believe this. I believe my God held me in the palm of his hand because my life had been so horrible that I had to believe that there was a better way to live. I had to believe you were doing what you told me. I had to. And I started getting confused and frightened, and I had been told, and someone talked today in a meeting, they said AA comes of age bored them. One of there's a thing in there that Dr. Chi-Bauer, they say it all different ways, talks about the recuperative powers of the human ego, and I was told, see, my great blessing is I drank me up, there was nothing of me left, there was no more Marie Stenner. The human ego was burnt out. And I was told about the recuperative powers of the human ego, and that the ego would return in full blown. And there I was. I started getting scared in AA. I didn't feel good anymore. I didn't understand what was going on. The manifestations of self were coming back full and strong. I was scared, and I started getting resentful and frightened and confused, and I didn't know what was going on. And I just kept showing up, and I was out of my league, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I knew I was trying to be grateful, and the manifest self was just there again. The madness was on. And when I was 9.5 years sober, my greatest blessing is that my disease of alcoholism is so far progressed that I don't get far out of line sober. And when I was 9.5 years sober, I stood there, and that beautiful scientist's husband had relapsed after 6 years of sobriety. And then he stayed sober another 1.5 years, and he was drunk again. He got drunk, and all the people in AA ran in to take care of him. I was hanging on by my bloody fingernails, and people looked at me and said, what are you going to do about that self-pity, Marie? And I started getting frightened and more frightened and all of that in AA, and I wasn't happy. And I didn't want to be sober 9.5 years anymore, and I didn't want to speak anymore. I didn't have anything to share. And I knew it. I had read the textbook Alcoholics Anonymous. It says, obviously you cannot transmit something you haven't got. And I knew I didn't have it. And I started going to people saying, you know, I'm not all right. They say, of course you're all right. Look, you're all right. And I kept thinking, what's the matter with me? And what happened to me when I was 9.5 years sober is I got my second greatest blessing ever sober. I got to experience the obsession to drink for the first time sober. I had always said that God removed the obsession from me because he knew that if I ever had to fight the obsession, the bottle would win. And for 2 months, I was totally obsessed with the thought of a drink from the time I woke. And this is the way it went. I won't go back to where I came from. My husband will put me in one of these hospitals like these ladies with Valium. I won't ever go back to that. I don't want to be 9. I started to envy newcomers. You remember when they were new and you'd say, I robbed a bank. They'd say, did you drink, kid? And you'd say, no. They'd say, then you're a success. You know, and I just wanted to feel like a success again sober. I didn't want to be 9.5 years sober. And I got down on my knees and I said another one of those naked prayers. And by the way, I said 5 or 6 of them sober. And I will tell you this, that every time I have screamed that deep, my whole universe has changed. And it was through a very strange series of events. Again, an unsolicited reach out, maybe a whisper from a Heavenly Father, that I ended up back in that home group. And thank you, God, old Carl had never heard of fear of abandonment. Thank you, God, Carl had never heard of manifesting situations in our life. Thank you, God, Carl was an old drunk. And he looked at me and he said, baby, resentment and self-pity by any other name are still resentment and self-pity. And he got me a legal pad and gave me a pencil and told me to take an inventory. And I wrote down all those resentments and all those fears. I took an inventory as if I had never taken one. And the great news that I have to share with you today, because I got down on my knees, and what I said in that naked prayer is I said, God, I no longer care if I am sober. This is after sitting at the right hand of Chuck Chamberlain. This is after all of it. I said, God, I no longer care if I'm sober, and that's heresy in Alcoholics Anonymous. But if you care, if I live through this, I promise you, I will talk to your other kids about it. And you know what? I talk about this everywhere I go, and the lines are just as long, but it's people with 10 years, 9 years, 6 years, 13 years, 19 years. You know, I had reached a point where I couldn't walk in an AA meeting and say, please help me, I'm dying. My hand was out to the newcomer. You know. Anyway, the great news is that the textbook, one more time, what the textbook Alcoholics Anonymous has stated was true. It says, resentment shuts us off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns. And that's what had happened to me. You see, I had written an inventory a long time ago. Just hadn't kept up with it. You know, my house had gotten real dirty. I want to tell you, before you ask, my husband has never gotten a miracle again. Last time he drank, he drank for 2 hours and went to ICU with cardiac arrest from alcohol poisoning. In between the time I had 5 and 10 years, my stepfather, who was sober, drank after 8 years, and they found him dead after 3 years of alcohol poisoning in Hawaii. I can list the people. And I am the only one that made it through. And you know, they told me when I was new I had to develop an attitude of better them than me. That if one person in my family was going to recover, it had to be me. And I am dedicated to that. You see, as much as I love you guys, as much as I love people in Alcoholics Anonymous, that little blonde-haired, blue-eyed baby I brought pictures to show, that's, you know what? He wears a size 12 men's shoe now. And he does not smell like a baby when I go to kiss him goodnight, but he is an altar boy and he still does what his mama tells him to. He is taller than me, and he loves to tell me, I'm bigger than you now, Mama. And I look at him and I said, son, you may be taller than me, but as long as you live, you will never be bigger than I am. He just walks off. And they taught me that in AA, you know. Anyway, the way I live today, and it's what I'm here to share with you, I went back over the steps, and there was so much I hadn't done just simply because I didn't understand, and I was able to go back through, and I'm so grateful for those people that sent me back. And I will tell you, I knew I hadn't finished my inventory. There were things I read in the book. It's very difficult in Alcoholics Anonymous. I stayed sick a long time because I made the mistake of listening to people in meetings. You know, it's very hard when they tell you the answers are in the book, and you look at the book, like with the inventory, when they say, you know, we don't take the other person's inventory, and then you turn to that page with the design, that, you know, that little drawing, Mr. Brown, Mrs. Brown, and I look at that, they say, we don't take the other person's inventory, and I look, and the answers are in the book, and I look at that, it seemed like Bill Wilson took Mr. Brown's inventory. And I just couldn't get it, you know. And yes, we do take their inventory. Yes, we take their inventory first. That's the only thing that enables any of us to get honest enough to take our own. You know, we take their inventory. And I went back and I wrote about all those AAs that had judged me, and I wrote about that drunken husband, and I wrote about all those AAs that were liars, cheats, and thieves and wouldn't take a 12-step call if it hit them in the face, and they had money, and I was subjecting each sex situation to the test, studying my book, taking 12-step calls, and I was broke and miserable. You know what I mean? And I put all that on paper. How do I live today? I have been taught ever since I was sober that the moment you're empty of self, you're automatically filled with God. You see, I had just gotten dirty. How do I live today? And I'll say it quickly. I live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I hope I'm not stationed there too long. Please don't ask me if I'm in the Army. I believe God stationed me there. I'm not in the Army. It's just I go where I'm directed. And but the way I live today is I get up in the morning, because I don't want to ever have my house that dirty again. I get up in the morning and I get down on my knees and I ask God to keep me sober, not to help me stay sober, to keep me sober, like the big book says. I then get down on my knees and I ask for spiritual brain surgery. You can make, our book says we ask God to direct our thinking. That is spiritual brain surgery to me, and God knows I need it. And I ask that my thinking be divorced of self-pity and self-centeredness. If my mind is racing, I don't think much these days. I pay a lot of attention, but can you imagine, if you're new in this room, can you imagine your mind not racing? My mind, the only time my mind is like a barometer. If it's racing, I know I'm into self. And the way I live, I'm going to tell you a real quick story, by the way. Well, this will just tell the whole thing. I thank you for your indulgence this evening. This is not the easiest talk I've ever given, nor the funnest. I will be gentle. Please, it has something to do with Alcoholics Anonymous. When I got the call to come to this conference, I've never heard of the National Women's Conference. When I got the call, it was such a privilege, and I told him, gee, I'd love to come. And I said, but you know, I smoke Camel non-filters. And I said, I am a smoker, and and I smoke when I talk, so if you'll let me smoke when I talk, I'd love to come. And I was told, no problem. And since I don't want anybody to use this to fight a beef with. I'm going to tell you how I lived my program today. This is all this is for. Okay, don't. So, through His strength, because nobody runs it. God runs my life. God knew I wasn't going to smoke tonight. God already knew that. There are no. He does not abdicate His throne to people in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know. So, the way I live is I woke up this morning and I'm drove to the bone. You got to understand, I'm full of I'm resending this message. I can't think. I'm just obsessed with self. I'm full of fear. I don't know, you know. And I pick up a pencil and piece of paper because I don't want that obsession to drink to come back. And I pick up a pencil and piece of paper. I write out those resentments. I write out those fears. I write out those resentments at myself, which are remorse. I come downstairs. I ask God to keep me sober. I ask for a divorce. Am I thinking? I thought, who can I read this to? You know, I'm the big-time speaker at the conference. You know what I mean? That's hard to do, work a program at a conference when you're a speaker. They already expect you to have done that before you get here. You know. So I got old Beth, your spiritual speaker, tomorrow morning, and I walked in a meeting. I said, "Where's Beth?" And she was at a meeting. I walked in a meeting. I said, and she knew. She saw the look on my face. She got up and walked out at me, and I said, "Baby, I got a 10th step." And I just really appreciated you listen to it. And we went over in this non-smoking room over here because the other ones were filled. And I read this 10th step to her. I'm telling you, Beth, this is Alcoholics Anonymous to me. I read this stuff to her because I don't want to carry that crap around. It's not the convention. Heaven is just a new pair of glasses. That's all it is. I don't want to live like that. So I read this crap to her. I said my 7th-step prayer, and I started tearing it up. And old Beth looks at me, and she says, "Marie, you can't." I started putting trash can, and old Beth said, "Marie, you can't throw it away. You got to burn it." I said, "Beth, we're in a non-smoking room." And I said, "Beth, if you burn that thing in here, it's going to set off the sprinklers. Then they're going to come in here, and the spiritual speaker and the banquet speaker, not only is she smoking in the non-smoking room, but she's burning the place down with the sprinklers." I said, "Beth, you can't do that." She said, "Oh, I used to smoke all the time where I'm not supposed to." And she said, "I know how to do it." And I'm yelling. I said, "Beth, no." And she runs and gets a pitcher like this and starts to burn my inventory and sticks it in there, and the smoke's what she's doing like that. I'm dying. I am dying. And before I left that room, because heaven is a new pair of glasses, and the moment we're empty of self, we're automatically filled with God. I was there, full of the same laughter that you women have had all weekend. I experienced the camaraderie of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I did that, and I've been whistling and snapping ever since. If you're new in Alcoholics Anonymous, come in here, get your cup of coffee, take your chair, and don't ever let anybody take it from you. Most of all, you. Most of all, you. I was told, and I'm going to close with this. This has been the most disjointed talk I ever gave, and I told you guys, I love it when people say, "Well, don't worry about it, God will speak through you." I remember somebody told me, my sponsor was standing beside me, and somebody told me they loved my talk, and I said it was God, and my sponsor looked at me and said, "It wasn't that good, baby." And I don't say that stuff anymore at all. But, when I stood there in Cheryl's house, and one of the things, like I said, I told you, I drank me up. There was no more left. And for the first time in my life, I could answer questions. I could ask questions because there was nothing upstairs. And I remember standing there with that lady that day and saying, "Cheryl, they told me in AA to stick with the winners." And I said to her, "Cheryl, what's a winner?" Because I had seen people in AA that looked good, and they got drunk, and I saw people that were spiritual and they got drunk, and I saw rich people get drunk, and I didn't know what a winner was. I said, "What's a winner?" And she looked at me and she said, "Baby, a winner's a loser that never stops trying." And I stood there that day, and I knew as long as I lived, I would never be a winner in Alcoholics Anonymous like the other people. But I made a commitment that day to die trying. And that's all I'm doing here today, is that I want to be sober more than anything. And thank you so much for letting me come here and tell you about it.